Everyone ready?
Ready.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Lakota Board of Education to order today, February 4th. Adam, please call the roll.
Mr. D.
Here.
Ms. Casper.
Here.
Ms. French.
Here.
Mr. Horton.
Here.
Ms. Schaefer.
Here. Do I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second? Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Adam, please call the roll.
Mr. Horton.
Yes.
Ms. French.
Yes.
Mr. D.
Yes.
Ms. Casper.
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer.
Yes. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. And with that,
So on the back of your packet there at your seat, you do have a copy of this, a hard copy. If you're like me and a note taker, sometimes you just like to take a few annotations, but it is also up on the screen. If you would just like to sit back and absorb, that is okay as well. I think instead of waiting until the entirety of the presentation is over, I'll probably do strengths. We can talk about questions. Areas, we can talk about questions and then support areas. I think that might just have a better cadence than trying to like keep everything and then kind of go back to sections. So as you know, I have spent basically my first 6 months doing listening sessions. So really all and we took those listening and learning sessions depending on the group or the crowd. They were about 60 to 90-minute sessions. And everybody got the same 3 questions, right, for uniformity and consistency. And so my questions were, what's going well in Lakota local schools? Sometimes I phrase that as, what do you love about Lakota local schools, or what do you not want to lose about Lakota local schools? My second question was, what are areas where our district can grow and improve? And I did give a little brainstorm, a little prompt that we'll talk about just to help get people brainstorming and marinating in that question when we got to that appropriate section. And then what are your expectations for me as a superintendent? So how can my role as a superintendent support you? And I thought that was important not only from an organizational focus, but me being new in the role to understand people's expectations of what a superintendent looks like in our district. So the groups that I met with, I did not differentiate all of these because that is about 1.5 pages in length, so I did some grouping. I met with all of our teachers, and I met with them by building. So, you know, Endeavor staff, Shawnee staff, Lakota East staff. I also met with the LEA Association leadership. I extended that invitation to the LSA Association leadership as well, but they thought because of the presence in just the normal listening sessions that they did not need that separately. So that's why you don't see that. Administrators. I want to just kind of expand your view of that. Not only does that include executive team, and it includes principals and assistant principals, but it also includes managers, supervisors, athletic directors, assistant directors. So anybody in a leadership role per se. LSSA members, so all of the different categorizations of that, custodian, maintenance, our aides, our paraprofessionals, our interpreters. We even had a session with our bus drivers, although they are technically not Lakota local school employees. I felt that that is a very large voice that helps keep our district running, right, figuratively and literally. So again, all the differentiations we have, administrative assistants, all of those were encompassed and had separate groups. And then non-reps as well, so even though they didn't belong to an association, making sure that we heard from that voice. Parents, I met with parents again by building, so having an opportunity just to hear from their perspective. Some parents did attend multiple sessions, like they had children in different sessions. And so that was really, again, kind of like the teachers, to mirror their experience in the environment that they're currently in or have been in. And then lastly, the community at large, we had 2 sessions for that. We had a business organization session, we had one organizations, also Board of Education members are included in that. So really, in total, I'm going to skip this slide and come back really quick. In total, we had 100 total sessions. I promise I did not work for that happy, clean number, but that is how it fell out. So we had 9 student sessions, so all junior high, high school, freshman buildings, and then also a 3 through 6 session as well with our student leaders at Endeavor. We had 46 staff sessions. Along with the listening and learning sessions with staff, we also gave a culture workplace survey that had 913 responses. We really strived. Betsy told me that 50% might not be possible to get at for that response rate, but we kept giving and giving. We got close. We got to about 46%. I think it was like 70 so people kept us from 50%, but at the first time we will take 46% response rate, but again, we'll work to get that up. We had 24 parent sessions, 15 community sessions, and then 6 follow-up listening sessions, and I want to explain that just a little bit. So as I mentioned, oftentimes with staff and or parents, I was meeting with them by building, right? And sometimes when you break certain roles down, you're hearing them very segmented. So special education, ELL, counselors, things of that nature. So there started to be some themes, and you'll see some of those, that I kept hearing about, but they were more broad in nature. And so I needed a little bit more specificity. And so those follow-up listening sessions or secondary listening sessions are really when I heard a broad theme that we needed to really dig into to really understand the nuances of that. So we had 2 ELL with our ELL teacher, or ESL teachers, you might be familiar with that language as well. We had special education with our intervention specialist and our special education aides, just our aides that predominantly work in special education environments, not like our paraprofessionals that work in like study halls and things of that nature. And then lastly, we have one with counselors, K through 6 counselors and 7 through 12. And the reason for that is, again, really just defining exactly what I was hearing. So when you say class size, we all know what that means, right? When you say special education or you say counselors, that is so multifaceted and so multi-pronged. We really needed that follow-up listening session to better understand the nuances of some of the feedback that I was getting. So those are where those secondary listening sessions came in. Before we go just the presentation and get down into the details, I did want to talk about just ethnography, right? When you're talking about ethnography and the study of culture, or really qualitative studies in general, I think it's important to remember that these are based on focus groups' perceptions, right? This is how they feel, this is about their experiences and their observations. And so in qualitative research, you're taking more unstructured data, right? And you're summarizing that and pulling out the big themes. There are numerous responses and numerous details that you won't see in this data because they didn't rise to the top of being frequent responses, right? Also, you often will hear me say perception is reality, right? This is what people believe as their truth and what they've experienced. And so I think that doesn't mean that there's not another side or another version to that story, but this is the majority perceptions that came to the top of all of that rich data. So definitely there are some underlying data to continue to explore, particularly with departments or teams, but I picked the very large themes that kept rising to the top across all of these 100 sessions. And I just think it's really important, again, that unstructured data with perceptions is very important when you consider that qualitative piece. With the staff piece, we did have a quantitative measure with the workplace study. The good thing that the workplace culture study, the good thing about that is the quantitative data really kind of mirrors the qualitative. So there weren't any real major outliers. And so it's good when that happens, when you see the quantitative data kind of complement that qualitative data. But again, we only had that with the staff piece. We didn't give that with the community at large. So, strengths. So this is my favorite part, of course, right? What's going well in Lakota schools? What do you really love about our district? And I think I said this the other day at our regular board meeting. There was not one single listening session, not one, not community, not parent, not student, not team. Everybody said, we have great staff and teachers. And most of the time, that is what they led with. That was the number one thing on every piece of chart paper. And they broke that down a little bit, right? A lot of people talked about our expertise, right? Just knowing their craft, knowing their job, knowing their role. Sometimes people tied that into veteran staff that have been here a long time and just kind of know the district and know their expertise and their level. The other thing that always brings a smile to your face is that teachers care about students and staff care about students. Having been in other districts, you would assume that that always comes up in qualitative data. It does not always. Sometimes it's very, very low in the data. Sometimes, and maybe it's because we just assume as educators, teachers love children, sometimes it just doesn't come up. And it was very, very high in our data. And so I think that is a testament that our teachers and our staff care about kids. And I think a lot of people related that to relationships. They know our kids. They not only know them inside the classroom, but outside the classroom and try to support them. Also, I heard that we are flexible and adaptable. I'm gonna add a caveat to that, perhaps to a fault. We are flexible and adaptable as staff, meaning, and I think this extends beyond the last couple of years. They are able to morph, they're able to kind of take things as they come, but sometimes maybe a little bit to the overall work-life balance, or maybe to the capacity of folks. That flexibility and adaptability, while certainly a strength of resilience, I think they're feeling a little worn in that regard, but it was still a strength. There was the caveat of maybe to a fault. We're a little bit too flexible and adaptable sometimes. The other thing we heard about was student diversity, right? With approximately 57 languages, 17,000 children. I don't know how you can't look at staff demographics and say that that makes us a very rich community, right? And so I think, again, embracing that student demographic, and then also from our students, they actually added the caveat that we love it when we celebrate and learn about our students' differences and their cultures, and in fact, they wanted to do a little more of that from our student perspective. We make a large district feel small. So despite being 17,000 children, 23 buildings, somehow we still kind of have a little bit of that neighborhood school feel. And I think that ties back to probably that caring about my student and knowing about my student. I don't feel like one of many. And I think that's pretty impressive to have 17,000 students and still say that we feel small. I was like, okay, like that's commendable. Everyone also spoke about opportunities for students, particularly, I'm gonna call it College Credit Plus, Advanced Placement, Credit Flex, the opportunity for our students to earn college credit or some type of licensure or experience before they go on to post-secondary, or whether that's enlistment opportunities with military. They felt like our real world connections were strong, and in fact wanted to advance those and keep expanding on those. They also talked just about our rich tapestry of extracurriculars, that there's opportunities for sports, there's opportunities for clubs, there's opportunities for drama. And so I think that's one of the beauties they saw of a large district, is that we have lots of resources and opportunities for children. School safety. School resource officers came up in every conversation. And I will say, being new and coming from a district that did not have school resource officers, I totally agree, right? I know why in my former district we didn't have school resource officers, and I stand by that narrative. But just the ability to walk into a building and know you have a school resource officer there who not only is helping with safety, but building that relationship and that culture, I think our community really appreciates that and helps them have that sense of safety. Our students, again, not all, but in 7 through 12 said, overall, we have a very friendly environment for kids. When you're new, you feel welcomed, you feel like you're kind of just accepted and brought in. Again, now not all, like we have our moments like every school district. And again, having a student that was brand new in this district, I would attest to that as well. Overall, very, very welcoming, very good experience. You would have thought she would have been here forever. But our kids were just very commendable about how nice each other are to each other overall, right? Community and sense of belonging. I heard someone, in fact, just even say it yesterday. We take pride in Lakota, and we take pride in the Lakota community, and I take pride in telling people where I work. And somebody said, even despite the last couple of years, which might have been rocky, I still take pride in where I work, and very thankful for the opportunity to work in such a diverse and multi-opportunity school district. Supportive parents and community. It was funny, some parents said that, but this was really, really a large narrative from our teachers, our students, and our community at large, that we have supportive parents. They want to be involved. In fact, I would say some parents want to be involved and volunteer even more than maybe we have right now capacity for, or maybe welcoming in. But overall, very supportive parents and community. Communication is improving, and I thought that was important to know. Communication is one of those categories that even when you do it well, it can also be seen as a growth area. And they said that especially in the last last couple of years, parent perspective, is that our communication is really improving. We're seemingly becoming more focused in our communication. I think that's probably a testament to like Parent Square. Also really good, strong opportunities to have a very positive narrative out in the community. A couple of folks even said, like, I feel like they're everywhere, right? Like I look at the website or look at social media and I'm learning not just about one or two schools, but I'm learning about all 23 schools in very multi-perspectives. And so I think that that is a testament to our communications and public relations team, that people are very cognizant that yes, communication, we can always improve in it, but it is improving and we actually view it as a skill set of our positivity and our narrative. And then lastly, especially with Mr. Zink sitting here beside me, right? Fiscally responsible and resourceful. I think people understand whatever their thoughts are going forward about our finances. I think people realize that we have stretched the last operating levy and that we are fiscally responsible and we are resourceful. I think some people, just like flexible and adaptable, would maybe say to a fault that we want to just make sure that we're keeping facilities up to date and things. But again, overall, I think there is a respect for our fiscal responsibility and how we have really endured and been flexible, adaptable ourselves, particularly from 2012 on to the current. So we're going to pause right there with strengths before we get into growth opportunities. Any questions or any details or nuances you want to hear about that particular data?
Can I dig a little deeper on the fiscally responsible and resourcefulness? Was that coming from parents? Was that coming from staff across? Help dimensionalize that across the groups a little bit.
So I think I'm going to splice it a little bit and give you kind of like a broken down piece. I think everybody would say fiscally responsible. How they define that is different, right? So from a community aspect, I think it was about stretching our funds, stretching our dollars. Maybe when we wish we did have the money tree in the backyard, being able to pivot and use those in different ways and hearing that perspective. From a teacher perspective, fiscally responsible, but again with the caveat of we feel a little lean in some areas and in some ways, whether that be curriculum, whether that be maintenance, whether that be staffing, which we'll talk about. That we understand that we want to be fiscally responsible, but we wonder how that is impacting the overall experience for children with programming or maybe with staff and their capacity of what they're taking on. Community at large, I think much more overarching. I think from a staffing piece, we understand and we certainly appreciate, but we kind of feel our fiscal responsibility a little bit more maybe than the external community. Students, it was really interesting with students, we were able to talk about, they had some really good questions about like, what does this cost? Like, what does a bus cost? Or what does curriculum cost? And so we were able to have a little bit of an education moment. And I think that was just a really eye-opening experience to understand what it even costs to move or to financially support a district of 17,000. Because they were saying like, high school busing or curriculum adoptions, just to put some figures for that for children, I think was really interesting. And then I think also with the fiscal responsibility in the community, I think they are very, very appreciative and respect the fact of where our student per pupil spending falls in relation to regional schools around the area. Any other questions in that category?
I keep mine to the end. I keep mine to the end.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. What was your greatest surprise from your perception versus what you heard, or were there any in this section?
Honestly, I think the fact when people, just because we are a large school district, the fact that people said we make a large school district feel small. The first time I heard that, I was like, okay, that'll be a nugget, I'll put that somewhere. But it kept being a reoccurring nugget. And again, coming from a smaller school district that was small and felt small, right? To be able to replicate that same kind of neighborhood school, community school, which I think is that pride piece, that's pretty impressive, right? And I will say twofold, I think that pride extended not only to the building that they were in, your pride in your school, but really the district as a whole. So it wasn't like I just take pride in being at Adena or Shawnee or Liberty Junior. Like, yes, I love that in my little neighborhood, but I take pride in just Lakota local schools as a totality and what we're able to offer a student experience in K through 12. So I think just 17,000, equating that with feeling small, I think is just an impressive testament to us.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, and I don't need an exact answer, I'm just looking for maybe a ballpark. 100 listening sessions, how many people did you talk to, do you think?
I would say on average, there were at least 20 people in each listening session, at least.
Okay.
Now some of those were bigger. I think the biggest one was maybe 50. The smallest one was 1. He was a former student of mine. It took us halfway through the conversation for both of that light bulb to go on for us.
Huge.
But I would say I'd say about 20, 25 was about the average. Also, I probably should add, I forgot this in the, when I was breaking down the listening session, and you know this as well, we had this conversation. There were no supervisors of any role in the room when we had listening sessions for any group, so whatever that group was, right? That is why board members didn't attend the community sessions, right? And the reason for that is just really transparent conversations. We don't want anybody feels stifled, and sometimes supervisors, just unintentionally in their roles, can change the dynamics of conversations. So I think just making sure that we were having really honest dialogue, and you could kind of tell, that's why we start with strengths, right? We start with positives so that you don't start with the growth area. I think by the time people got about 15 or 10 minutes in the conversation, it felt very much more like dialogue rather than like you're writing down on a piece of chart paper, kind of what I'm saying. So I think it became much more natural feel.
Can we go to the college credit and advanced placement opportunities section? Did any specific courses on repeat rise to the top as student favorites?
No, so no one really talked in terms of specificity of class and or teacher or anything like that. They talked about the opportunity to diversify what each personalize what children would want, right? Respecting the fact that for some kids, that's advanced placement. For other kids, that's college credit plus. For other kids, that's credit flex, people who are in gymnastics or in ballet or things like that. I think it was the ability to say, how can I get the most out of my high school experience, not only from a high school perspective, but a beyond high school perspective. The 4 E's came up quite a bit, just making sure that we understood whether you're college bound, employment bound, entrepreneurship, or enlistment, that we had something for everybody, and they appreciated that ability, especially from a parent perspective. The financial implications that it has for parents as far as savings were very, very appreciative.
And then was there feelings around K-6 in that category or?
Yes, actually. So you'll see this a little bit when we talk about growth areas. I think people are very respectful of the opportunities we have in K-6. However, I think, and this actually came from a student perspective, students would love to make sure that in the high school world, secondary world, there is an exposure point for them before they get to high school. So one particular narrative, and again, this theme is there as well, but there was one particular narrative from a junior high student was talking about how he was looking through his sister's course guide for the high school. And he said, there's so many opportunities that all look great. He said, but I'm a little overwhelmed and I don't quite know what to take. He said, because I don't know if I'm good at that, or I don't know if I have an aptitude for that, or I don't know if I have a skill set for that. So thinking that about this, and we've talked about this in the curriculum department, going forward with our programming, just making sure that when we have a bookend opportunity in the high school, that there is an exposure point for that somewhere, whether that's once, multiple, that mirrors that, so that kids, coupled with their youth science data that we have about aptitude, interest, and skills, that they can take that complete package and more inform the courses or the opportunities that they take, rather than getting to the high school and feeling like I'm just kind of trial and erroring to see what I'm good at. So I think it's just extending those backwards into those deliberate and defined points to make sure we're exposing, so that then kids can narrow in or realign their focus on their interests or skills or aptitudes.
Thank you.
It's almost the opposite, like you have so many opportunities that,
Right, and they wish they had them
That you don't know
earlier,
what you
so
want
they
to do.
know if they
Yeah.
were good at them,
Yeah.
or like, do I love that, right?
yeah.
And I can understand that, oftentimes when you get to junior high, that is the first time that you do course selection, right? And as a parent, living this, right, with course selection happening this week in junior highs, just helping to steer a kid to understand, like, do you like that? Are you at all interested in that? maybe it is a growth area for you. And I think pushing kids into extending their growth areas is something just globally we can do better. We tend to build people's strengths instead of helping them build their growth areas. So taking the data we have in like youth science and things of that nature, and coupling that with course opportunities, I really think can expand kids' repertoire of skill set. Anything else for strengths? Okay, growth areas. There are more than one slide on growth areas, so I've tried to chunk this out, okay? Growth areas. The largest narrative by far from K-6 teachers and parents was large class size. They just talked about, they understand our thresholds, they understand, our policies and our administrative guidelines, they understand that, but it feels larger than they would like. Somebody even talked about research. They were like, I understand that maybe research doesn't complement the need to bring down class size sometimes, but it's just that when we have 25 kids, I wish we had 21 kids, or I wish we had 23 kids. It wasn't a huge differential. I don't think anybody was talking about 20 or less, but it was like if we could just bring those numbers down into that like early 20 range, I would feel better. Now maybe kindergarten, if it could stay like at 20, 18, I think they brought that up too because they understand that depending on our philosophy around class size, that impacts the master facilities bill, that impacts planning and things of that nature. So just, I think that's one of the things you'll see in actions is making sure we talk about what that philosophy is, because I really do think it's a philosophy, right? And it has financial implications. And so that was probably the largest narrative from K-6 teachers and parents collectively. Tied into that, and there's little nuances of this particular thread, is specials and electives. From a K-6 piece, it was about a consistent rotation and minutes or class time in K-6 specials. The best way I know how to say it is they would like to return to the model before the last budgetary implications of, instead of having specials for a quarter, they would like to see them year-long. It doesn't mean that every special meets every day, but they would like a healthy dose of specials all year long to make sure that their kids are moving, to make sure they're exposed to fine arts, to make sure that they're exposed to music. Again, I think it's that exposure piece. How are we really nurturing the whole child and making sure that there is consistent time to make sure that we're developing those interests or developing those skills. Two nuggets particularly of that, and again, perception. Remember, perception, these are how people feel, right? There is a disappointment that we do not have performance opportunities for children in K-6. Meaning that we don't have choir concerts, or we don't have band concerts, or we don't have art exhibitions. Now, I'm not saying we don't have those in pockets, like we just had the 6th grade honors choir, right? But I think it's how do we really build those kind of forward facing, you're up in front of people, you're figuring out how to stand still even in a performance opportunity, and how do we embed those in so that kids feel more comfortable in those avenues. There was specifically, I didn't put it on the slide, but there was a specific music theme here. It did not rise enough to the top to make the slide, but there is an undercurrent about music specifically here. I'm gonna call that music and drama. That there is a want in K-6 for some drama opportunities. I think that our PTOs supplement that depending on the building and opportunities that they have, but they wish that we had, I don't know if necessarily a theater program, but in that kind of fine arts whole child, how are we giving opportunities for children to perform and be in front of each other? And then there was a narrative around music, and I'm gonna pull it out, it was a strand around orchestra, right? Yes, there's choir, yes, there's band. Are we missing, it's a question, are we missing an orchestra opportunity, again, with the understanding of fiscal responsibility and investment and maybe the lift that takes. Again, small, did not make a strand, but there, that little nugget was there. From a 7th through 12 perspective, no hardcore data on this, but perspective. There is a belief that the lack of exposure or the lack of consistency in seat time in K-6 specials is impacting the program in 7 through 12. meaning that because we have less time in art, it is having some repercussions on fine motor skills. Or because we don't have children being consistently exposed to music class in a continuous rotation, that they're a little bit behind when it comes to reading music, or they would be farther along in their progression of scale and things of that nature. Now, on the flip side of that, we have fabulous music programs. I've sat in them, I've heard them sing, I've heard them play. The jazz band, I was like, oh my goodness, right? We have wonderful music programs. Please hear me say that. We have wonderful art programs. I think there's just the worry of if we had more continuation of that and consistency in that in K-12, would we be able to give a little bit more time and breadth in the curriculum in 7 through 12? So instead of teaching a kid how to read music in 7-12, I could have them just pick up their instrument or whatever it may be because they learned how to read music in K-6. Or some of the fine motor skills with drawing and painting or things of that nature, they would have kind of not mastered that, but at least had exposure to that prior to 7-12. So again, narrative, perception, not quantitative data, okay? Again, going down that specials, we talked about K-6. In the junior high, there was electives, but a really strong voice about world languages. Meaning that they often tied this to the word destination district, which you'll see on a different slide, that it feels like we have a hole in our curriculum. We have that opportunity in 9 through 12. Why would we not want to expose them earlier and perhaps give them even opportunities for high school credit in world languages? Although I will say there was some dialogue about what those languages should be, right? There was also a voice about K-6 language, like could we have a language experience in the elementary school or primary schools? Before we would go there, I think we would need to, if we decided it was our philosophy, we would need to do a more 7 through 8 focus and then look about what that looks like down, right? You've gotta have the middle before you take it down. I mean, yes, you could do like, you know, Spanish or French or something like that in 1 through 8, but I think we would kind of stair-step that approach if we choose to go that way. And then, although we have a ton of resources and a ton of opportunities for kids at high school, they always want more, right? They always want more, and I would say the narrative there from particularly children was, can we have a little more voice in that? Like, can you just get a pulse on how we feel about classes? Like, yes, we respect you as an adult, we think is valuable and we need, but we would love to just have a little bit more input into that course proposal process and what that might look like. Let's just kind of chunk this out a little bit because those are too big. I'm gonna pause right there. Any questions just about those pieces, the large class size or the specials and electives?
Okay, I'm curious what languages they want in 7th and 8th grade.
So I think the consistent voice was definitely Spanish, just because of the prevalence societally. But then I think you had, you name it, you can list it,
Yeah.
right? Latin, French, Mandarin.
Mandarin's great.
Why can't we have all of the languages that we have in our community? That's what one of our students said. And I said, well, let's talk about how many languages that is, right? And so I think there was that education moment of like, okay, we might have to narrow that down. You know, there are, talking about fiscal responsibilities, there are impacts of that, right? There are staffing, there's programming, there's curriculum. I think we also do have some really rich quantitative data that we can look at about what languages are successful, right? And sometimes you want a language to be successful in a school and it just doesn't take hold, right? Even though you might have all of the community and student demographics to support that, for whatever reason, it just doesn't click sometimes. So if that's a vein that we would like to explore further, you know, we can dig into that quantitatively with qualitative data and talk about what might be something we want to do or multiple do, or how do you dip your toe in something to see if it's a success and then expand it. So I think we have some philosophical conversations to have there.
So on that, is there other languages that other schools area teach that we don't have?
Yes, so, I mean, just for example, I'm gonna use when I was a teacher here, right, we had German. We no longer have German, right? You know, if you go to Sycamore, they have a very, very robust Mandarin program. I will tell you, at Wyoming City Schools, we tried Mandarin. It wouldn't thrive and survive, right?
We tried it here as well.
Right, so I mean, I think the three prevalent are French, no, I'm gonna say two. The two prevalent really are French
French
and
and
Spanish.
Spanish.
Latin, it really depends on the school, their philosophy, maybe their historical backgrounds. But again, Mandarin depending on, and German not so much, although it used to be about a decade ago. I don't think you see that in most schools in our areas now. You do see it more north. But again, we can get all of that quantitative data, and if that's something we would like to explore, and we can really get into the weeds on that in the future, if that's a philosophy that we want to continue to kind of wade through.
I'd like to ask some questions around large class size. So definitely understand the perspective for K through 6. What did you hear in junior high and high school level? Nothing about class size?
I mean, we're comfortable.
Meaning, I mean, with junior high, I think there might have been a nugget here or there about like a math class being large, but I think people said, but I understand that my class size is larger because my kid's in an advanced class or an
Yes.
accelerated class, to make sure that we have a smaller class size over here. I wouldn't, like I said, it was, and I have the broken down data, and I wanna say it was less than 5.
Okay.
Less than 5 responses in that narrative. But yeah, particularly at the high school, there was not a comment about it. In the junior high, it was more math related than anything, but there was the understanding of that balancing act. Anything else in that regard?
I'm curious if there was consistency among students, staff, community, in their responses here. If it was a particular group would be more.
For the
concerned.
rotation of specials in K6, I think it was pretty consistent. For world languages, actually, I would say it was in ranking order, it was parents, then students, and then staff. And then electives at high school, I think it was much more staff and parents, less on the teacher narrative. Although, I should add the caveat, on world languages, if you happen to be a world language teacher, that data was much higher. But overall for staff, I think it was in like and I will say in world languages, and again, we would talk about this if we decide this is our philosophy to explore that vein. There is a healthy competitiveness in this district around ASL and other languages. There's a healthy competitiveness around that. And so I think when you talk about world languages, and if we decided to take those down, we would have to kind of broach that subject and talk about where that fits, how that fits, what does that look like? Is that a healthy competitiveness? Is that a detrimental competitiveness? Like, I think we just have to wade through that, because there definitely is a narrative with students and again with staff more so than parents about what is the perfect balance of language. And in any high school environment that I've ever been in, and as a teacher and as an administrator, I worked in high school environments, it is a balancing act with electives, any elective, not just world language, right? There is that healthy competition because it's about the teacher, it's about the experience, that kids gravitate towards that experience. And so when any of that changes, sometimes you see this flux. That flux makes staffing really honestly a nightmare, right? Because you might have a spike and then you have a dip, but you don't really need to get rid of because that spike is gonna come in a couple years. So it's all of this balancing act, and sometimes things get a little lean and then you have to go out and you have to figure out how to advertise and recruit. So the staffing model for world languages can be really, really complex. From a hiring process, like just hiring and getting staff on board, it can be very, very complex. Latin teachers are sparse, right? French teachers are sparse. And so really, sometimes you gotta get really, really creative on that staffing model to make sure that you can support the languages that you even want to bring in.
Does ASL count as if you need a language to get into college, does that count? I mean, that's
For
what
the most part, ASL does not count as a world language in college. It counts as an elective, okay, but it does not count as a world language. So, but that also depends on the college that you're going to, right? And so counselors try to have that conversation about what is your dream school or what is your reach school? And talking through how that might translate on an actual transcript to a college. But for the most part, ASL is looked at as a elective and not a definable
Right,
world language in the
right, if you need
foreign,
to get the
in the
language
foreign language or world language department. Mhm. But you still get college credit, it's
Right,
just
you
how
just
it's
have to-
parsed out.
right.
But that's not a universal, that there are some schools that accept that as a world language.
What about for the honors diploma?
I would have to check, I do not think it counts in the honors diploma, that's my last pulse, but I can double, triple check that, I don't wanna misspeak on that.
Sorry, way in the weeds, but sorry.
No, that's okay.
Just-
I can double check that, absolutely. Particularly with the changes that the honors diploma recently went through. Okay, moving on, okay, behaviors. Before I get into this one, I do wanna add the caveat, but I do think this is, not a unique narrative to Lakota, I think this is regional. Like when I go to my superintendent meetings, just my own previous experiences, I think this is a narrative that you would see for the most part since COVID, regionally. There is an uptick in student behaviors, that is the perception, okay? If we dig into discipline data, we might see a different narrative, right, particularly on the building or particularly on the grade level. The perception is in severity and quantity. So deregulated children's behaviors are looking different than they used to. Again, I do not think that is unique to a Lakota narrative. Again, it was a very strong narrative, but I do think you would hear that regionally across the board. There is a question, I phrased it as developmentally appropriate. I get staff are asking that question, right? Meaning, I understand that kids are kids and that kids are learning school, particularly in K-6, right? They're learning how to behave, they're learning how to do school, things of that nature. But at what point is it the behavior is just inappropriate and it's not developmentally inappropriate? Where is that line of, I've crossed into this is not okay, right? And then I think from a staff piece, there is a yearning for more staff safety and training, right? And you'll see my additional bullet of accountability of that, right? And that looked different in the narrative. So I want some training, I want a bigger tool belt and strategies on how to deal with the behavior that I'm seeing, because a new teacher raised their hand in the crowd and said, I didn't have a classroom management class in college, nobody taught me that, it was kind of assumed I knew how to handle that, and she said, I just feel really, really under-equipped. And there were a lot of people that were kind of shaking heads like, yeah, or I had my classroom management class 20 years ago and behaviors are different, right? So from an accountability standpoint, it is, from a K-6 narrative, it was almost like, I want a supportive measure flowchart. I want a better understanding of, when do I pass this behavior off to an assistant principal? Or when do I get more help from my administrator? Like, where is my lane versus where is your lane? And when do I get multiple people involved? There's a lack of clarity of, I want to own my 20 square feet, but I don't know when it becomes bigger than my 20 square feet and I need support. From a 7 through 12 narrative, more staff piece than anything, not so much parents, was I just want to make sure that we're following our code of conduct. We're enforcing that with consistency and making sure that it is a team approach of that when I write a discipline referral, that there is almost a communication loop and feedback. They believe it's being handled. They just don't know how it's being handled, so it's closing that loop. I'm handing it off to an assistant principal or a principal, and they're handling it. I just don't know what that looks like, and so the next time little Johnny does it, I don't know what's happened previously. So I think in the discipline, it's not more discipline, it's just that feedback loop of helping everybody understand what's happening in that and communicating well in that. From a K-6 piece, again, it's just that helping everybody understand how that moves along in that progression, and then where is that developmentally appropriateness piece. For behaviors, there was a strong narrative involved with special education here, but not just with special education. So there was a special education vein of this about uptick of behaviors, but it extended beyond that, just behaviors in general, particularly through K-12. There was, or K-6, with also a little bit of nuance of are we clear about what it means to be kindergarten ready? Like when we accept a child in or a kid enrolls in kindergarten, are we really clear with families about what are some basic foundational skills that they need to be successful at an entry point for kindergarten? And maybe that's around bathroom procedures, maybe that is around some behavior pieces, but making sure that we're having a common lens in enrollment about what those parameters are.
Do we provide any guidance right now?
There is some guidance. I think it could be more robust. I think from a new parent perspective, particularly kindergarten, again, this was a subgroup of a subgroup of a subgroup of, I understand like about reading and I understand about writing, but more of those soft skills of school, what does that look like, right? And I'm gonna use myself as an example when my own child started kindergarten, okay? I mean, I'm an only child, I never had a sibling, okay, never babysat in my life, okay? No, true story, okay? And so Addison is an only child as well, right? So I had no context, I was the youngest in my family, I didn't even have cousins younger than me, right? So when Addison started kindergarten, someone said to me, hey, you should really help her like learn how to hold her lunch tray and how to open a milk carton. And I was like, what? And they were like, well, when she goes to lunch, that's pretty intimidating for kids and staff will help them. But if you could help her with that skill, that's really gonna help her feel more comfortable at school. I never would have thought about that. Like that just was not in my repertoire of understanding. So and it did. It was like we practiced opening the milk carton and we got practiced carrying a tray and we put apples on it and things. Just I think some things like that to help students have a better entry point. And particularly I think what we heard about, like even in our recent community conversation of like, I just don't have scope of like American education versus where I came from and the educational experience. I think we assume a lot of things that people know those things, but maybe really breaking that down and giving like a little parent tip guide or help guide or things you can practice with your student, just like you would for enrichment or remediation opportunities in the summer, kind of doing that more on the front end of like, hey, here's what kindergarten looks like in Lakota local schools and here's some things that you can help your student with.
We used to do something like that. I mean, when my kids went to kindergarten, at the parent meeting, they said, our job's to teach them to read and write. Your job's to teach them how to sit, how to listen, how to follow directions, how to, so we used to do
I
things
think
like
we
that.
have, I think we've taken on a little bit more of that
Yeah.
across the board, not just in Lakota, across the
Right.
board.
I agree.
And I think consistency of that. You'll hear over in a different slide, that could be totally happening in pockets. How that is happening consistently
Yeah.
across buildings, I think is where our opportunity lies to improve that.
So another thing too that I think happened here is kids these days, even at a young age, at 2 years old, you want to help them do something, and like, no, I can do it by myself. So little by little, we
Independence,
started drawing back from.
Independence, yeah,
You've already detailed a lot of this, but was there anything else that in the different groups when it came to behavior that were incongruent? Like parents were in a different place than staff or something like that, beyond what you've already kind of detailed?
I think our parents are actually very appreciative of how our students handle, about how our staff handle student behaviors. I think our staff are much more exacerbated by
Overwhelmed.
student behaviors. Particularly, particularly from our aides. I think that was the loudest narrative about behaviors. But I think our parents and our families are very appreciative. I think our families feel that our teachers feel that appreciation, but at the same time, they're struggling and grappling with, kind of to your point, I've done every tool in my tool belt, the behavior is not getting better from my perspective, it's not getting fewer and farther between, so I don't know if I'm being successful with using the tools I have in my tool belt, can I have some more? I think they're just at the end of their repertoire of skills, and just wanting some additional training. There was some mentions of just some behavior specialists coming in and doing some PD, and I'm talking about just from tier 1, right? Not a tier 2, tier 3, just a common understanding of some behavioral expectations in tier 1. Again, there was a special education component to this, but it extended beyond that, for sure.
Do you think staff understands the resources that they do have at their disposal
No.
and some of our,
No.
okay.
I think that's that flow chart piece, that clarity of who do I reach out to, when do I reach out to, when am I overreaching, when am I underreaching, and when they would use the word, when does the expert, an expert can be defined multiple ways, right? When does the expert come to support me? So I think it's a little bit about them understanding the training that they need themselves to kind of fish and do their work and have that strategy tool belt. But then also when I've exhausted all of that, what is the appropriate time to reach for help and who do I do that with? And is that a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 and really delineating that in kind of that MTSS model. And I think over top of this, I did not put this on this, but there is the PBIS component of this as well, right? Modeling and teaching and having very clear expectations. I think that would also, but you know, PBIS behaviors, it's that positivity and that accountability together. So I think having that more robust PBIS model overlaid on behaviors with modeling and expectations and consistency with that accountability piece certainly would help, particularly not just in K-6 but K-12. Any other questions about that piece? Okay. And I put this particular group purposely right after because we had talked about behaviors and that there was a little bit of special education vein to that, but it was much more extended. But I would also say special education was a large narrative overall in the listening session. And I broke it down into various components. I'm going to kind of start actually from the bottom of that list and go up. There's a feeling, perception, right? As we're working with HR and pupil services and looking at our numbers, I'm not saying it's reality, but there is a perception that they feel understaffed from a teaching perspective. More so aides than anything. I don't think there's a large feeling from an intervention specialist, but aides feel like that there's more support staff needed. Again, I think that's a little bit tied to that behavior narrative. So if you were able to divide those and extrapolate those out, you might have a different perception on that. Now, too compliance focused. I want to add a caveat on that. You have to be compliant,
Yeah, of course.
okay?
That's the law.
You have to be compliant in special education, right? I know Andrea's looking at me like, what in the world, right? You have to be compliant. You can never give that up, okay? And I'll be honest, I've been in some districts that were not compliance focused enough, and it was off the rails,
Yeah.
okay? It was not good. It was like litigation waiting to happen, okay? I say that with that bullet coupled with the top bullet. Yes, everybody understands that special education has to be compliant, 110%, they get that, right? I think when you couple that with the customer service piece, which was a parent and teacher narrative, they just want a better balance. Nobody wants to give up compliance, nobody, right? They understand why we have it. There's a customer service piece that I think that they feel is off balance. I don't think they think it's totally missing, but I think they feel it's off balance. Now, with that said too, and I had this in a secondary listening session. Remember, I had a secondary listening session with aides and intervention specialists. And this is how I heard, I made a statement, and we kind of moved on, right? Because we couldn't get too in the weeds in this. This was not an action-oriented listening session. In that customer service piece, it's about perception, right? And sometimes in special education particularly, the process doesn't turn out like you want it. Meaning, there is no IEP, or maybe you don't get the accommodation that you want, or maybe there's a sense of separating the process from the product or the outcome. And I don't have that data for you right now. We didn't get into the weeds with parents and teachers of that. But sometimes when the process doesn't go your way and you don't get the product that you want, that customer service piece feels harder to swallow, right? And I don't have the data on that, but I think there is some of that. I think I didn't get X, and so I feel like my customer service wasn't great, right? But I think it's also us reflecting on maybe you don't get the product that you want, but can we still have a really wonderful customer service model that makes that outcome more palatable for you as a family? And again, these are all perceptions. We have not talked in the weeds about even what that model looks like, but I know sometimes, particularly in special education, because it is such a personalized conversation with families, that those can be really, really hard to separate. And sometimes separating the people from those answers of no, or from those answers of I don't think it's the right time, or your child doesn't meet these qualifications, that can get really sticky, right? But so I say that, I think it's about a balance of customer service while still being compliant that can just be a little bit more nuanced. I think from an identification, labeling, and specialized unit, there's just some, I think that goes to that understaffed feeling a little bit of like, we have some specialized units, or we have certain students with identifications that maybe just need a little bit more support than what we're offering right now. Nobody said this in the listening, I take that back, they didn't say it this way, but I think people were, parents, not staff. Parents were a little bit confused, felt maybe uninformed about the coming together of pupil services and special education that happened last spring. Just of like, we would have liked to better understand the why of that, or the purpose of that. And I also think perception, right? I keep going back to that word, right? Because it's a feeling of like, special education is such an entity amongst itself, to group it with pupil services seemed not the customer service model they were looking for. That they worried about, when you coupled that together, am I losing some of that customer service that I'm yearning more for? I will say a strength of the compliance piece is I do think people think that across the board, that people are checking for compliance. They want people to be compliant, and that is an expectation. So I think that is a good thing, because I've had some experiences where that was not the case, and it got really out of wonky. And so I think it's just making sure that we are compliant, but we have that customer service piece, and that customer service piece is all about feel, right? It's just about that feeling of what did you experience in that moment, in that 20 square feet? Sometimes that was verbal, sometimes that was outcome, sometimes that was time spent in the conversation. There's lots of nuggets to that customer service piece that we'll work on with the appropriate staff to kind of extrapolate that out. Facilities, it should be no surprise that this is on here. Facilities, overall, we just need more space. We're growing, maybe not from OFCC perspective, but we're growing, and we need overall more space. We need more dedicated spaces, small group instruction, specials, that came back to that narrative about the K-6 experience. Specials as far as we need bigger band rooms, we need bigger art rooms, we need bigger intervention spaces. So just really dedicated spaces to do what we need to do. Athletic facilities always comes up, always, right? Whether it's turf fields, whether it's indoor complexes, whether it's athletic facilities at the junior high. Got a lot of attention. Also, there's a perception that there are different expectations from the different sides of town on the quality and quantity of athletic facility opportunities that we have. Aesthetics and maintenance, that's how I'm just gonna, that's how I phrased it. I grappled with the wording of that a little bit the last couple weeks. Meaning, does it look pretty and does it work? Right? That's just how I would say it. Does it look pretty and does it work? And I think that might go into some staffing pieces, that goes into some size pieces, I think that goes into some communication pieces. There are some things on there that, again, working with the maintenance department and operations department to just make sure we wrap our head around. I also think there is a understanding of where our facilities are now. How does that help us or hurt us as we go forward in master facilities and a potential bond issue, right? Making sure that that's just as tight as it can be before we get to that level. And this was a pretty large narrative from parents only, this last one. A lack of a centralized community space. the space that came up most, and I knew when we started, they would always give the example.
Yeah.
Why can't we have a
Mason Community
Mason-esque
Center.
configuration, right? Meaning, and oftentimes people would look in the building we're actually in and say, like, you know, you're centralized, like, could we have a building or a space that when we did Frozen Junior, that everybody in the community could come, instead of having to do a Friday small performance and a Saturday small performance, and like, is there a way that the whole community can come together, like a centralized experience? But they also understood that that would need to be a mammoth of a facility, right? And they didn't know, some of the questions were, do we even have land or space to do that?
Or money.
Or money, right? That was never really brought up, it was land or space. Any questions on this part?
Where's that money tree out there?
Yeah,
How's it
right.
growing?
Adam's watering it, right?
I just had one question, special education, not to take up too much time. So really quick, obviously there were sessions that were focused on special education. Were there themes, did special education pop up outside of those focused conversations?
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's how we got to the focus conversation. So
Okay.
the theme was so loud, right?
Okay,
Meaning somebody would say special ed. Well, what do you mean when you say special ed? Special ed's like special ed, right? Like, are you talking staffing? Are you talking compliance? Like, so we took that and we had a secondary session with those intervention specialists and aides to say, okay, I heard this narrative, dissect that a little bit more for me, so that when I go back to the department, when I go back to Andrea and her team, I can say, okay, not only did I hear this, but here's some like really detailed nuggets that we can start to kind of tease. Because if I just said, hey, I heard special education, it's just so broad, it's not like class size, it's not definable, right? So that was that secondary piece, like ELL, right? The ELL conversation was very, very helpful in that I kept saying we need more, people kept saying we need more ELL support. Okay, what does that mean? So we got in the weeds around curriculum, staffing, data input, and that's gonna really help inform some of those action pieces that we take.
Okay.
All right. Staffing model, again, perception, not saying that there's the data to support or deny, but particularly from aides, counselors, and support staff in totality, they said it feels lean. I think the biggest narrative in here was clarity of role. People just need real clarity of their role. And yes, I mean job description, but I just mean in the day-to-day. From a parent perspective, it was, who do I call? When I need help, like, I just don't know who to call, right? But I also heard that pretty often in staff as well, in that we're just so large that sometimes I don't have clarity on who my go-to is. And then cookie cutter versus needs-based. I talked a little bit about this the other day. There is a belief that we sometimes do the same staffing model across the board rather than looking at a building's individual needs and staffing it from a different threshold. So I'm gonna pick on admin assistants. We might look at buildings and say, every elementary gets two. Well, would it be better if we said, hey, if we had thresholds and said, hey, if you have 500 kids, you get two. When you get another 150, 175, however you define that, maybe then it begs the question of, do you need an additional support? There's a thought that we're not doing needs-based, that we're doing more of that stamped approach of everybody gets the same amount of staffing. I'd say that's more so in those, particularly in those roles above, support staff, counselors, aides, like, are we looking at the size of a building, the needs of a building, the demographics of a building, and staffing based on those, rather than just perhaps the holistic number. Professional development and training, people just really want it tailored to their role. There was a large conversation about orientations for new staff, whether that's principals, LSSA, LEA, and then safety, and I'm not talking about building safety, like SRO safety or anything like that, or like ALICE training. I'm talking about safety measures within your role, whether that's behavior, whether that's something in maintenance, whether that's something in HVAC, whether that's something in bus safety. So not safety from a building, that was actually a pretty strong narrative if we're doing that well. More safety of how do I know my role and how do I make sure that I'm getting very nuanced training on the machinery or specialized skills or students that I interact with. Let's stop right there on that before we go into that next one. Staffing model or PD? Questions? Okay. Staff morale. I'm gonna separate this into kind of two halves. LSSA, and again, I did not meet with LSSA leadership, although I extended the invitation, they did not feel that that was needed. LSSA groups were large in attendance. There's one department particularly that I can think of that has like 11 or 12 members and none of its members showed up. So I think they had a healthy representation across the board. Overall, again, their perception is they feel undervalued and they feel underpaid. Now, one of the things, if you remember from the contract rollover, is we agreed to do the salary study, right? And we're in the middle of that. And I think just the thought that we're doing that, I don't know how that's gonna end up, but the thought that we're even exploring that and looking into that, I think they're very appreciative. The undervalued, I would say, because they feel lean, they feel a little lean, but more so like, I just want my voice to be respected and heard. I just wanna be listened to, and I wanna make sure that somebody understands my thoughts, my opinions, just hear me, kind of thing. And again, perception. From a culture piece, I think there is a feeling overall from staff, this is very internal. This is not staff, parent perspective or community perspective, this is all staff perspective. There's a feeling of micromanagement that has gotten more robust over the years. Now, when you talk about alignment, sometimes people feel alignment is micromanagement, right? So I add that, right? So micromanagement can mean lots of things, right? But there's a thought of like, it feels a little heavy sometimes. The view of central office particularly, and I've shared this with the team, we met the other day to talk about staffing because I didn't want them to hear this from a first meeting in this. There is a disconnect between a feeling of disconnect between central office and buildings. Sometimes that plays into, we want to see you more, we want you to be visible more, we want you to be in the classroom more. Sometimes that's, you have forgotten my 20 square feet, you've forgotten what it's like to be boots on the ground. Sometimes you will hear it described, Adam and I even heard it described yesterday, as the ivory tower or the crystal palace. I think it's that disconnect. And I think we have to wade through that. I also think the last couple of years, and this is a word I don't use lightly, but it's a word that came up quite a bit. And so the data is the data. There's a fear of central office. And that was the word that was used, was fear. But stepping back from that and really listening to the narrative and really looking at some of people's word choice, I think that extends to the last couple of years and what this community has gone through. Meaning fear of, if I say something, is it gonna be on the news? If I have a board meeting and I express my meetings, does it become contentious? So I think that it's all in there, right? It's central office, but I think the Board of Education, the media piece and how we're portrayed, all of that is connected. But it is the label of fear of how that narrative, how my voice, how that's going to be perceived and how that's going to maybe come back to play in my 20 square feet. So I don't think it's just the staff, I think it extends to some of the experiences of this district at large. But, and somebody joked in one of the secondary sessions, you know, we always blame central office, that's what they said. And I said, well, we do sign up for that, right? And there's truth in that, right? But I also think helping, again, I think a lot of that is also tied to, there was a strong narrative of we don't understand the why. Like we don't understand the why we're doing things or the rationale behind something. And so I think all of that is tied together. I think some departments have a stronger,
Ties.
yeah, some have a stronger issue with that than others. this was one particular building, one particular building's narrative was, again, that visibility piece, that we only feel like we're seen or supported or visibility of central office if it's times of safety or publicity. That you're here when there's a safety concern, or you're here when there's a publicity matter, whether that's good or bad, but we want you to be more the fabric of our being. So I think disconnect, again, they might use the word fear, I would use the word disconnect, that there is a feeling of disconnect between the central office and the staff. Again, that was a very internal narrative, not a external narrative. Any questions on that before we go to the last?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So on the staff morale, staff morale is very, morality, morale is very important in
And
every business,
Yep.
everything you do. So do they feel undervalued from who their leadership or from the perspective from the central office?
so interestingly, and you talk about a surprise. Based on my past experiences, I was shocked. I heard very, very little about building level administrators. Very little. There was one particular building that praised their building leadership very much, like, hey, like, I feel like we're on the right track, our culture's going great, like, but overall, very, very little about building administrators, which I was very, very surprised about. It's almost like it went from teacher role to kind of supervisor, manager, central office lens. This principal role, there was the narrative of micromanagement, right? So that might explain why you feel that jump, right?
The principal
The principal-
micromanaging the staff,
No,
or the principal
central.
being micromanaged by central, okay.
So I think that might be why there's the view from probably that the decisions are coming from here,
And they have no choice.
and they have no
Without their
choice.
input, probably, that's what they
So
think.
again, I think that's why you probably didn't hear about that principal level a lot, and from the principal level, it felt like, I shouldn't say principal, supervisor role. That principals, assistant principals, supervisors, managers, that, and you often hear this, that you're kind of caught in the middle. You're trying to lead, but you're also trying to support the vision, mission, and the objectives of the organization, and sometimes I feel like stuck. But I think also part of that culture is just really healthy dialogue, right? I do think that there is a missing component, and this is not from a listening session, this is me being new in my 6 months. I think that dialogue, that healthy professional discourse and dialogue and being able to agree to disagree, I think we can get better of that as an organization as a whole, whether you're talking teacher, whether you're talking principals, or you're talking central office, I think we can get better at that in totality. Which I think, at least if you feel heard, you feel less micromanaged. Again, you feel validated in the process, even though the outcome might not be what you want it to be.
Well, and understanding the why,
And the
to
why.
your
I was
point.
gonna say, that's the key, is, we often just throw directives out there in the last several years.
So I will
Don't tell them why.
say a lot of people put that caveat on of that micromanagement piece, and that value piece felt even more under strain in probably the last 2 years. And that's why I think it is tied to a media piece,
Yeah,
Board of Education, community experience,
Yeah.
central office, that's all in there together. And so it's just kind of encapsulated into central office, even though it's multi-pronged.
Do you feel that the administrators, or did they share that they felt that way?
About fear,
Just
Um,
about being micromanaged?
some supervisor roles did, not across the board, but some more so than others.
to-
That I just want, one of the things I think how it was, I'm gonna use the word placated. I feel placated sometimes, meaning, I understand X is in a leadership role, you're in a leadership role, we're in a leadership, I understand your leadership role. If you need to make a decision, because it just needs to be the decision, and you look at me and say, hey, here's why we're doing this, we're not gonna be collaborative in this decision making, but here's the decision, I can accept that. That's what I heard. But I also heard, that's not what happens. I garner your input and I get your voice and their belief, I'm not saying it's reality, you made that decision 5 times ago, but you put me through this process and you made me feel like my voice was supposed to be heard and you made me feel like my voice mattered, but you had this decision already made. You placated me. And so I feel like you wasted my time and you didn't respect me enough as an individual to just say the decision is made. Now, I don't know where that comes from. But there's a belief of you ask my opinion and it doesn't matter, when I would respect the process more if you just say, this is a decision and while we're doing it, I'm gonna get your opinion over here on a different opinion and actually use it. I think that's a pretty new narrative. I would say that is definitely within the last 2 years, not extended beyond that.
Is that on the view of the central office or the micromanagement aspect?
Both. That the decisions have been made, but then you take me through a process, and I could give you some examples of where they pinpointed that. I think those are, and sometimes those are perceptions of people and not totality, if you know what I mean by that. Those are tied to certain personalities and people, but they get lumped into a collective. I think there's the ability to make some real gains in this just by dealing with some personality pieces or personnel pieces and just giving some feedback that maybe people are not aware. I think you have some individuals impacting the whole.
I think these are complicated issues and
They
they're
are.
tied into a lot of things, transparency, information flow, communication. And so I think while we have great leaders, there's probably opportunity for leadership development to help bridge all of those things and how they translate to these individual circumstances. I think we also need to own some of this as well, given that there hasn't been consistency in the district for the past 2 years. And we've had 3 superintendents, we've had, directions that have changed. So all the work that we're doing, 4, you're right.
I think all of that's part of that.
All of that's in there. So I have a question, it may not have risen to the top, and if Simon didn't. In the staffing, did you see any sort of friction or distinctions that came through based on experience level, age, like tenure with the district? We have some very, tenured staff, and then we have some really new staff. Was there any flavors that dimensionalized across those?
I think new staff would say, I need more orientation, I need more training, I just need clarity of my role. And I think we were talking about this the other day when we were talking about orientations. We have a pretty good model for teachers. Not LSSA, not administrators. There's not any, besides onboarding, there's no real orientation for those buckets, right? And think about how big LSSA is and think about how critical administration is, right? I think it's just that, what is that common foundation of how things consistently flow? I think from a veteran piece, I think that the piece of the last couple of years and the changing leadership, they feel that even more so because they've been here, they know the opposite of that, right? And so they compare it to, why doesn't it feel like this time, right? Or why doesn't it feel like X? And the reason I say that, just for a comparative, the reason I said about the building administrators being a surprise, in my previous experience, we hemorrhaged building administrators. We hemorrhaged them. And so if I had had listening sessions in that district, it would have been about building level administrators. The lack of consistency, the lack of vision, the thing. We're fairly stable in that regard. Our turnover has been here, right? And so I think, to your point, that lack of consistency, that lack of stability, that changing of vision, that changing of personality. Someone said, I got whiplash. I don't even know, just personality wise, much less vision and educational philosophy, just personality wise, there's a lot to go back and forth in 4 people. So I think when you even just take that piece and start extrapolating that out, and then you extrapolate that over 23 buildings, it all just gets compounded. And and this goes into the next piece, in the absence of consistent leadership, people lead themselves. It just happens, right? It happens. And so I think the other piece, so this slide should be kind of no surprise. People are yearning for alignment in systems, just common expectations, right? And experiences. In curriculum, you know, I don't hear people saying I want to be lockstep, but I do think people believe, hey, we should have consistent experiences for kids across buildings and classrooms. In communication, what are our common expectations? Something as simple as, when should I expect people to get back to me? Is that a 24-hour rule, a 48-hour rule? And then extend that into PR of, how do I get that information? Where do I look, right? I think it's as granular and as big as those scopes. Processes and procedures. To be as large as we are, some of the systems that are not as robust are interesting. We need to delve into that, right? And I think we have a lot of processes in place that are person or role specific. They're not written down. And so they're not written down, they're not executable across 23 buildings, right? They're in somebody's head, but they're not there for it to be replicated and to be used. And then I think the other piece of that is accountability, making sure we have those processes in place and those procedures in place, and that we're holding people accountable in reaching those, and we're supporting people in reaching those. Not accountability like, I'm gonna slap your hand, but accountability of, how do I help you reach the expectation that we are striving for? And having clarity around what that expectation is. Anything else about growth areas? This was the brunt, this was the biggest, right, as you would expect.
Which is good.
Right, which is as you would expect.
You've been working, I feel like, a lot on owning the 20 square feet. How do you feel like that impacts some of these other areas?
Let's save that for actions, because I want to save that, okay?
Okay.
So, Julie, you're on my slide, just so you know. I didn't feel like I could put support, like what do you expect from the superintendent, and not put me in the picture, but I didn't want it to be like me, okay? So I was like, Julie can be in the picture too. So how can my role support you? I don't think there are gonna be any surprises here, right? Listening and action, right? They want both. Valuing input, collaboration, and teamwork. Just improving our narrative and our reputation. People understand that the last few years have been difficult, but they're still very prideful. They love being in Lakota, they're happy to be Lakota employees, but like, could you just help us have a little more positive spin? Just stability, we just want some stability. And we wanna be a destination district. That was a phrase people used quite a bit. There's the feeling of, not that we need more clarity about the expectations of what that means to be a destination district, and how do we return to that feeling of our zenith that we had in the past that maybe we're not feeling right now. Vision, transparency, you know, Doug said that word. Know the why, right? Growth mindset. I think people are also like, we do understand that sometimes we do things just because we've always done them that way. We have a more forward-facing view of what that could look like. Alignment and accountability, again, I put that in organizational structures, curriculum and instructional clarity, and a streamlined vision. What I mean by streamlined vision, we just have to make sure that we're not too trendy, right? Like, instead of our plate turning into a platter, turning into the soup tureen, like, instead of it getting bigger, can you streamline that so that everything, we just really understand the why, we're very forward focused, and that is a very streamlined approach instead of a trendy add to approach. Culture and morale, just support and recognition, trust, respect, and honesty, and visibility and approachability. So someone said, and I laughed, I remember when they said it, they're like, I just need you to be present and normal. Can you do that? Present and normal. And I said, I'll work on that, right?
Who's normal?
Yeah, right? So just, I wanna see you, and I wanna know I can say hi to you, and you're gonna be friendly and there. But I also think, again, that is just that revolving door piece that we've experienced. Like, I just need to make sure that there's some stability, that I see you, that I know you've got us in good hands, and that you're a person that I can say hello to in Kroger, or when I'm getting my gas, I can ask you like, hey, when's that football game, right? That kind of feel. The support and recognition, interestingly, on the staff survey that we gave, the Culture Workplace Survey, that was the lowest category. that staff felt that they were celebrated and recognized was the lowest category. And so something like the Gym Awards, right? I think that that is a testament to why those feel so natural and wonderful, is that people feel celebrated for their expertise, for their voice, for their input. And so just continuing to grow that recognition and support of our staff, I think, and celebrate the wins, which ties back to the narrative. Any questions on that one?
I just wanna say my reaction to the photo is not for lack of desire to support. I just wanna make it clear that it's, I think we all stand ready to
100%.
provide the same much support
100%.
and make sure that
100%.
we are here to do
I just
all
didn't
the
wanna
things to
put
be
my
done.
like,
Yeah.
I was like, I need a picture with somebody else in it.
So I think we all look forward
It's
to
that
doing
governance
this.
team.
Yep.
Absolutely. Any questions about this page? I feel like those all kind of support those growth areas and strengths that we saw.
Just a comment. I completely understand and I agree with most of what their concerns are here based on what went through in the last couple of years, like we keep saying. Because, and I think as a board too, maybe, I don't know what we need to do for those at the teachers level to feel appreciated, to be recognized more, maybe more in our board
Okay.
comments and stuff like that, I don't know,
Okay.
but I know in the past, it looked like the board members are our enemies, they don't like us, and that is why to the point of managing, to a point where the board want to see what I'm teaching in my class. So those are some of the things that I think were in their mind, but I think as time goes on, when those pressure are no longer there, maybe it might change.
Interestingly, from a Board of Education perspective, the board level specifically was brought up in one conversation, one listening session in totality. One, and it was kind of to what Isaac had said, we had an experience, we're moving past that experience. We just wanna make sure that the governance team is all on the same page. And so that's really, and it happened at one parent session where the board specifically was spoken about. I think, again, sometimes board perhaps gets kind of lumped in to that leadership, central office kind of feel. But specifically mentioned it was that one particular instance. So now we have all this data, what do we do with it, right? That's the $1 million question, right? And so I think a couple things, and I would like to follow up on some conversations with the governance team, Board of Education, all of us, about what are our philosophies, right? Particularly about class size and programming. Like maybe that's the world language lens, maybe that extends on to a couple of things. And the reason I say that, I think we have to be aligned in that, so we're all carrying the banner, but also if we're going to do some of those things, that has some impacts, right? It has some impacts for master facilities, it also has some impacts for 5-year forecasting, so making sure that we have those conversations, so we know what those philosophies are, so we can start to have a more proactive model in building those in. New strategic plan, we've talked about that. Folks did not talk about a strategic plan like with specificity, but I think that's what they mean with it needs a refresh, or we need a new one, or we need clarity in that. Audits, Tana, to your point, Julie, I think we just need to take a pulse of a couple of different aspects, processes, systems, and audit those. Something as granular as job descriptions, right? Making sure that we understand our 20 square feet and what that looks like and really delineating. But then also looking maybe more objectively, like we're doing a transportation audit, right? Last year we did a HR or FMLA audit, doing some more of those broader pieces as well to see where those holes are. And I have some ideas in that we can talk about additionally as well. But just making sure we have some inside perspective, but some objective outside perspective too, to where we see those holes. Evaluating and implementing processes and systems. We're in the process of doing that right now as some things unfold. Sometimes we see a hole, we need to implement a process or a new system. Sometimes we're looking and saying, okay, we don't need to start from ground zero, but can we evaluate that and refine that? Whether that's our hiring processes, whether that's something like a student teaching process, whether that's a check and balance process that we need in different regards. But I think the biggest difference is that proactive approach, right? And I put staffing and hiring and budget implications. Because all of those things above it potentially have implications to a budget, that have implications maybe to staffing and hiring. And we talked about this with our executive team the other day when we were having like an all-day marathon of a staffing conversation meeting. I would like for us to know our philosophies, be able to say, we want to do this, take those numbers, I'm gonna pick on specials, okay? If we wanna do specials, if we wanna bring that rotation back, how many staff does it take? Give those numbers to Adam, and the finance team, have them put that in the 5-year forecast. Maybe that's a one dump, maybe that's a stretch it over 3 years. What does it do to that? So that then when we're ready to engage the community, we can say, here's truly what we need to be a destination district. Here's what it cost us. Let's talk about all the wonderful things that you're going to get with this opportunity. Or, hey, here's this model, and this model. All are fabulous. Here are what they cost you, but understanding this is what this model offers that this one doesn't. So I think it's that proactive approach rather than, not that we do this, I'm not saying that we do that, rather than going to a ballot, potentially getting some money and then making that money work. I think the narrative should be, here's what we can do if we have the right finances and the right levy situation or operating situation or bond situation, whatever it may be. And if we don't, then this is how this is going to be impacted, right? Being very proactive to that instead of reactive, and making sure that we build those staffing implications or modeling into that 5-year forecast so that we know what that does to the longevity of our finances. So I think, again, we have those philosophy conversations, which are kind of in the weeds about how we feel, then taking however we come out from that, using that in staffing and hiring implications, and then putting it in the budget and bringing that back and saying, okay, here was our wonderful idea, here's what it did to our 5-year forecast, right? What can we do to massage that or manipulate that a little bit better to get a little bit more stretch out of it?
That was kind of in alignment with what I talked about in the weekly update, if you guys looked at that. And we had a meeting last week, and it has to be what the program is and not about, I think there's still a lot of PTSD from 2013 and a lot of reference to that. And eventually we have to move on. Eventually we have to figure out where we want to be and what we're trying to do, and then map that out, deliver it.
Well, and you've spoken before about that people say we can't afford that without ever asking the question if that's a priority, and if that's makes
It makes
sense
my
and what
job a lot
we
easier.
invest in, you know, like.
We're here for that, we're here to make your job
Well, and
easier.
from a staffing perspective.
That's what I appreciate.
I'm gonna pick on specials just because it's big. If you said, hey, Ashley, we wanna go back to that rotation, and let's say we ran a staffing model and we needed 25 staff, let's just say that, okay? Or 20. We need to know, what does it look like if you dump all 20 in 1 year? What does it look like if you do 20 and 10 and 5? Adam can build in some buffers if we need to just know all of those implications to know what's feasible, or you go, hey, 20 is not feasible, what can we do with 15? Like, we need to work those problems on the front end, see those projections, and then we can say, hey, here's our 5-year plan, here's our 7-year plan, here's our 10-year plan. And that looks like a very proactive visioning approach, rather than every year you're kind of building and then sharing, building and then sharing. We can show that comprehensive picture. And I think also doing that that's more like aligned strategic planning, proactive approach, all while doing audits and evaluating those systems that support how all of that is running.
So I'm a very big believer that a ballot issue just is the community's way of casting their vote, whether they agree or disagree with the vision. And at the end of the day, we all want to be aligned. We all want to figure out what that's supposed to look like. And I think when the time comes, we should be very proud of that.
I feel though that there's also been a tendency to not talk about the impact of what our vision for education in the district looks like and the financial reality. So I will say there's a lot of times where there's a lot of discussions, and this is me observing as a non-board member at the time, where there's a lot of discussion on what we wanted to do in the district that didn't show up anywhere in the 5-year forecast. And so you looked at a 5-year forecast that looked like, hey, everything's rosy,
But when you put
but
those,
everybody wants this stuff, but
Correct.
oh wait, that's not in there. So the ability to get more clear across all of our stakeholders on, hey, this is the stuff we're looking at, and this is what it's gonna do.
Yeah.
And have that honest conversation. I think it's, let's take the defensive systems off and be able to open it, get that feedback to say, oh, wow, that looks incredible, we want that, or, ooh, that's not where we wanna go. I think that's important for us as a board to be able to hear, so we need to be able to link that.
And the beautiful thing about this is community data, right? So if we say, hey, we listen, not only do we have this data, but we're getting ready to give, the Paul Fallon survey. If we take that and say, hey, we heard you, that you want these experiences. We got that from you as a community. We're building that in, we're projecting that out. Like, it wasn't like the governance team was just thinking about, like, we heard you loud and clear about our growth areas and our strengths. You don't wanna give up this. This is what it costs to keep those things. You wanna add this. This is what it costs to keep those things. So I think the beauty of having this data is that it's our community narrative, right? It's our staff and our community and our parents and our students using that data point to explain our why. We just didn't pick this out of nowhere, right? We listened to you and we're trying to build that in. And I think that's that philosophy conversation, is having that conversation. Are we all on the same page? And is this data, do we want to support that data going forward? And then using that, also that Paul Fallon survey to even add to that data, I think helps you have a very, very robust why, right? That doesn't look so individual, it looks community-based.
Well, and you even mentioned sometimes in the conversations, some of the students were like, we want X, high school busing, whatever it may be, and you're like, okay, understand that this is what that means and this is the cost, and then they're like, maybe that's not what I want. So, I think it's that piece as well, that it's easy to have a want without knowing the cost.
Well, and, destination district it has a lot of connotations, right, connected to that. Those don't come without cost, right?
Yeah.
Cost of a lot of things, right? Cost of a lot of things,
Yeah.
and I'm not talking just financial, right? There's cost to programming, there's cost to transportation perhaps, there's cost to facilities. And I think if that's truly what we want, making sure we have a strategic plan and some pieces in place to get there, and helping people say, hey, we heard you loud and clear, this is what you want. Here are the steps we need to get there, and here are the finances attached to that.
Well, the balance, I think,
Mhm.
showing the balance, this is what you want, we told you, asked us, we asked you, you told us, this is the implication across the board, because regardless of when we all align, there will be a group that won't be happy with our decision. So again, it speaks to how important it is for all of us to align and carry the banner, and balance what people want, and I think you're right, that Paul Fallon will
Help, yeah.
help with that. I just have a quick question on the audience. Do you have a list in mind? Do you know where you're going with an audit? Because there's some things that came up. Okay. I would trust you on that.
And I, one of those was transportation, which we had talked about earlier, just our contract and being prepared for that when it expires and being proactive. But based on this listing data, I do think there's some opportunities to do some outside, that's very, because sometimes data is super personal, right? It can be very personal, particularly when it's qualitative, right? Like I said, sometimes you just need really strong quantitative data to go with that. And so there are a couple of nuggets where I think we can either do an internal audit, or we can do an external audit, or a combination thereof, and make some really definitive choices.
I'd like to just give some feedback collectively across this. So first off, thank you for all this work and sharing this. I think it's also not just something that got parachuted in today. You've been bringing us along on the journey as you've gone along, which has been very helpful and sped up our ability to kind of synthesize this. I also think this is something that you've mentioned in that came up in conversations. People really appreciated you doing this, but it's very easy for me to tuck this away here,
Can't
and
be
then
one and done.
4 years from now,
Yeah.
never see it again.
Can't be one
So one of the things that I'd love to do to try to see if, and I want to invite this for us to think about, we don't need to decide this today, but there's a lot in here, and a lot is tied to the actions that you said here, but there's a lot of that's ongoing conversations when you talk about customer service and perception versus reality. And so I'd love for us to give thought around, outside of the actions that you've outlined here and what is going into the strategic plan, is there opportunity here for us to develop, what I would call some sort of dashboard across some of these key things, where we can actually tie some key performance indicators to it. So discipline, for example. If the perception is not aligned with the reality, even us getting the data on the reality of behavior allows us to have the conversations to shape the behavior. But also moving along this track, I'd love for us to think about what quarterly would we want to take a look at on this stuff, to say hey, this is going well in special education, or here's our opportunities here, not a scorecard, that's not what I'm asking for, but it's a how do we gauge the progress that we're making along these vectors, because we'll never get to a perfect score on any of this. But then I think that will also hopefully arm you better with the fact that you've got the board support in going with stakeholders to say, we heard you, this is what we're doing, and we're concerned that we're not making enough progress here, and we can give that input. So not anything today, but I'd love for us to think about that and building that into our work process.
And I've actually thought about that, Doug, from a strategic plan, right? So when you have the strategic plan and you have the yearly goals, like you said, whether we call it a scorecard, a quarterly measure, how are we doing that? And getting a pulse not only internally, but externally as well. Is our internal perspective matching that external? So whether that be surveys, whether that be more listening sessions of a different fabric. I very consistently said to people, you're gonna see me and we're gonna have these conversations, not from a new superintendent role, but from a just continuing the conversation and getting input. So I think having those measures as we have those yearly goals tied to that strategic plan, I think definitely that pulse piece will be super helpful.
Okay, I have something to add to that. It's a feedback as well. By the way, thank you so much for this, because I believe that it's a continuation of your promises you made to us. You said, when I get in, I'm gonna do my 30 days, my 60 days, my 90 days, and I'll come back and give you my findings and plans. And somebody that's in sales and marketing, for you to really succeed in selling, you have to know your product very well. And this is an in-depth work that you have done, and I really, really appreciate you for that. I also want to ask that there are some demographic that I think needed to have been maybe contacted or get feedback from them, which I believe is not late for you to do that. Because I remember you mentioning that you're going to engage our business community, you're going to engage elected officials. Were you able to get any of them?
Yes, so I sent about, specifically to the community at large and to elected officials, I reached out personally with a handwritten card to 150 of those individuals. So key community members and elected officials, wrote them a handwritten note with all of the dates for the community conversation, inviting those folks in. They either came to those sessions, not all 150, but several attended those sessions. Elected officials, I've had some individual listening sessions with and or some phone calls with because they couldn't come from Columbus. So yes, I do feel that that voice is here. I feel like we could expand that. I think our community at large, like our community Lakota is here, maybe some more elected officials, like government officials from Columbus and above, we can still tap into. But yes, we did reach out to those intentionally. I had about 150 cards total that we reached out to.
Great, thank you so much.
What is your, I feel like again, from a lot of what you said, and alignment and systems, it's, the next step would be building our strategic plan to make sure that we're all rowing the same way. What is the timing that you are currently thinking of moving into that phase and getting that work?
Probably February, March. I would like to, I have a call on Friday, just to work out some continued nuances about the strategic plan approach. I think though before that, we can certainly start in those focus group pieces of strategic planning, but I also, in conjunction with that, want to have that philosophy conversation, because I want to make sure that that we have an idea of what, not a product, I don't want any, but like that we're on the same page as we go into those conversations, so we're asking the right questions, we're giving some push where appropriate, we're taking in information. And so I think those aligning philosophies in that strategic plan can kind of run concurrently with the focus groups that will be happening collectively.
Just in time management, this has all been wonderful, and I appreciate the time that we had in this work session.
we have 15.
But we have, like 15 minutes, and we have Central and COSBA.
Central, we can pause, because we could do that in master facilities. We can do that in a master facilities meeting if we need it. So I think we should probably go to the COSBA piece.
Okay. Oh, well then, that'll be fairly quick, I think. So I had asked this to be added to the agenda. We had talked in our earlier work session about the COSBA conference, and that we said potentially most people did not want to do that this year, and that we had talked about finding something that was more facilities focused. We were unable to find something that's more facilities focused.
I think we will have those, there's definitely some summer and fall opportunities that are being pushed out with facilities. I think probably if we should have a little bit more alignment with our facilities, because otherwise I think we might be overwhelmed in some approaches with facilities. But I think there definitely are some summer and fall opportunities that are gonna be there. COSBA is March 21st through the 23rd. It is in Atlanta. I know that at least one of us wants to be registered to attend that, and so I think our question was just more, we wanted to make sure that that opportunity was not missed as we do that registration, if anybody else wanted to attend, or if we wanted to revisit that and say we wanted to attend as the group.
I can just speak for me personally, I still would like to spend my time and energy on something more facilities focused, and I would be comfortable not going to COSBA this year.
And if you need to think on that, you can certainly just, email me and I'll make sure that we get that registration process in place, but I think we just wanted to make sure we had talked about it, but we didn't wanna miss anybody if you wanted to go. And like I said, we will kind of get a list of the facilities pieces that are coming up, so we know the timelines of that.
For me personally, I feel like I'm torn between what to do, knowing that I don't believe COSBA is as robust as it needs to be. But I also don't know if one person going is worth it to the district. The amount of things that they could bring back, one person, when 5 people or 4 people go, or
Just a different
7,
opportunity.
you can cover more. So I'm torn, that's all.
I'll share my perspective. I'm torn too. I value the professional development that we get and the exposure to ideas, whether it's COSBA, whether it's OSBA,
Right.
or other organizations. So I don't wanna walk away from that aspect of things. But I agree, like assessing COSBA, the level of programming that they have there wasn't as exciting as I would have expected it to be. And I know they're under development and developing, but
But it's also been,
And
having done both,
I highlight that most of the
NSBA.
best sessions were the ones that were repeats from OSBA.
Right.
Done by Ohio people. And
Right.
so I'm like, why are we traveling that far to get what we already
and
got?
spending that kind of money. And having done both NSBA and COSBA, what we got from NSBA was so much more robust.
From what?
But it was much more robust with
And
NSBA than what we
there was
got from
there were a
COSBA.
lot- It was a lot bigger at that point.
But yeah, who knows what that's like now that COSBA has, I still believe.
Is NSBA
Knee-jerk
an option, given we're not
Well,
members?
It's actually in Atlanta the weekend before.
Yeah, I remember them like highlighting that last week, that we're back to back
Yeah,
almost, right?
or either the weekend before or the weekend after.
Yeah.
And we haven't been to NSBA since they split, so I don't know what that kind of. I think it's unfortunate that the split has happened, because I think it has made neither of them maybe as robust as they could. I will say this, and I said it then, I think it was a knee-jerk reaction by OSBA to do this,
Yeah, it looks like it's,
to pull out and with a ridiculous reason,
I
with
think
with no input from the membership. 20 people decided that we weren't gonna be part of NSBA anymore. 20 people at OSBA, 20 board members, when there's
it's April 4th through the 6th
thousands.
in Atlanta.
When you're talking about facility opportunities, is that conferences or
Yeah,
is?
so there
okay.
are conferences that are just facilities oriented. And one of the things you'll see on the Fallon survey, there's ones that if you wanna be energy efficient, there's ones that are more focused on like innovation in STEM. You can kind of pick and then there's one that's just facilities in general. So I think we'll make a list of those, and it could be that we all go together to one, maybe we split, and go to different ones depending on the feedback of the survey. The National Superintendent Conference, which actually has normally a big heavy layer of facilities in it as well, is in Nashville in 2026. So not next year, but apparently Atlanta's the happening place. It's Atlanta this year, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So just kind of keeping all of that on the cusp of that and kind of putting a timeline of when those are, and then we can decide, where that falls in our in our overall timeline of design, architects, builds, all of those kind of things.
I have a question.
Yes.
NSBA, did you register for NSBA this year as membership? But we registered for CASBA. What was the need for registration for CASBA, and now we're torn between NSBA and CASBA?
Because Ohio left NSBA.
Yes, and that was the reason for it.
The
So as a
reason
body,
why
the
was-
state pulled out of that association, okay? And then we now agreed that we're gonna register for CASBA, and we paid for it. Did we not?
No, we
No,
haven't
we
paid
have
for
not
anything.
registered for COSBA.
We haven't registered.
It's a
not.
national membership, but
Yeah.
that fee is
The
nominal.
conference is on top of that national membership.
Okay, I think during our organizational meeting, CASBA came up.
Right.
And we all agreed and voted that we're,
Did we vote on
We did
something? I
not.
don't think so.
We
just
voted
voted on
for,
OTA.
we had to approve the national membership.
Yeah, which you get resources and different things from having the national membership, just like OSBA. But then if you take advantage of certain things like conferences and such, there's additional fees or certain consulting or whatnot. So there was a membership fee, and the fee was not very significant, as I recall.
but there was anyway.
But yeah, I know, like, you know, I get emails about certain subject areas where you can attend a conference on
Right.
it, and then it's additional charges.
Right, for that additional charge. There is a small part of me, and my fellow board members may disagree. There is a small part of me that, for me, part of the conference experience is the time we spend together outside of the district and outside of board meetings to be able to get a better understanding of each other, and so that is
Team
my
building
one.
is definitely.
There's a team building piece.
I'm looking at the conference program here, just to see if I can pull up that agenda. There's like empowering your school board clerk, enhancing support for board effectiveness, transforming underperforming schools. I'm just hitting some highlights. What to ask for your understanding your district's finances, bridging the gap, connecting school board members to their schools, school safety, transportation systems. Everyone get on the bus, the mobile learning experience, a little bit different bus there. School law, artificial intelligence, like I said, I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a smattering of kind of some things that I see on there. Strategic planning, highly quality school boards, school safety, leveraging AI, building trauma, informed ecosystems.
Kind of a lot of what OSBA
Yeah,
had.
not a lot about, I don't see a lot about facilities, not that I'm saying that that's good or bad, I'm just,
Right.
there's a lot of more about OSBA instructional, I think it's about bridging the gap for all, so there's lots of sessions about, student groups, student populations, as there should be, but there are definitely some board pieces here, navigating meetings, agendas and minutes, school board focus on strategy and planning, situational awareness, I don't know what this one means, but pinky swear, promise you'll come back tomorrow. I don't know what that's about.
Well, we do that after every meeting, so.
Right? So those are kind of just some, I kind of clicked on the 3 days to give you just kind of a smattering of
Yeah.
of
The other
flavors.
thing to consider at this point is hotel accommodations.
Mhm.
They may be few and far between this date for something that's in March. That's just a thought, that if we wanted to stay,
And I can get a pulse on that, if it is a group, how we wanna look at this, I can get a pulse on what that might look like.
Why doesn't everyone let Ashley and or Melissa know by next, can we say 48 hours, so that they can take action if they need to?
be interesting to get a pulse on where they are, if you have to stay
Yeah,
30 minutes
right.
away and be bussed in, that's
Right,
different
okay.
than walking out your room and
Right.
to the conference center.
I can get a pulse on that too. Yeah, if you could just email me, and then I can move Melissa in depending on where we all are, and I'll at least get a pulse on hotel accommodations about, are we walking, busing, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Alright,
I just send you guys, I downloaded the program just now, and I'll send that to all 5 of you as well.
Thank you.
All right, and so Central will
we
take
will,
to
we'll
facilities?
either, fold that into a master facilities meeting, which is totally doable, cause that's its relevance to that conversation. Or we can, we can move that to March depending on our needs, or even in our regular board meeting.
Okay. All right, anything else before we move to adjourn? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? Hearing none, Adam, please call the roll.
Ms. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. D,
Yes.
Ms. French,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer,
Yes.
at 8:53.
All right, just when I got my 10-minute warning to stand up.
Julie and I went to this law seminar, there's nothing in there.